Hey everybody, DJ here, and welcome to another tutorial. This is going to be how to create a simple logo in Blender, and we're going to be using LuxCore to create the final render. If you haven't yet, please like and subscribe to the channel. It really helps me out. And just an FYI, we are on Discord. I also have a Patreon. The file and some of the textures will be available on the downloads for the Patreon subscribers. So first, what we're going to do is we're actually not going to jump into Blender like we normally do at first. I'm going to make a recommendation to you. And that is that when I get into the textures section and into the logo, if you want the one that I used, just type in Natron logo and you should be able to find a one of these right here, which is what you want is kind of like a PNG. So look for PNG and try and find a high quality one if you can. You should be able to find it in here. And what you'll also want to do is you'll want to jump onto texturehaven.com when I talk about some of the textures. Go into the textures area and download a couple things from here. I'm going to tell you the ones that I specifically used, but it's going to be up to you to find something that's going to work for your particular project and your tutorial. So just an FYI, I use this brown leather here and I think a concrete. So let's go ahead and start in Blender. So what we're going to do here, and this part you can do in any of the render engines. We're just going to create the geometry for the logo. Now, a lot of people will probably pull in an SVG or some sort of that has curves, but we're not going to use that. We're actually going to use a different method, and there's a very particular reason why. And what we're going to do is we're going to create the mesh from scratch. So we're going to hit A here, delete everything. And if you look down here on the bottom left, you can see that there's a keyboard and a mouse for those of you who aren't used to my tutorials. I'm also going to be turning on here the screencast keys. So let's go ahead and turn that on, and you should see them down there on the lower left. If you see it go away when I start doing the render mode on the screen, that's why that happens. It sometimes screws up my viewport. But let's go ahead and start. So first thing what we're going to do here, and what I do is I save my files to a particular assets and then an images folder. And what we're going to do is we're going to drag them into here as references. So I hit 7, went to the top view, and I'm going to grab the SVG file here. This is actually a PNG. It's just called SVG. I'm going to click and drag it right here. And there we go. I did get a little bit of error from the screencast key, so let's hopefully hopefully that doesn't happen anymore. And then what we're going to do as soon as we bring it in here, we're going to hit G and Alt G and Alt R just to make sure that it's set right in the middle here. Now, a lot of you probably have done this where you start with a plane or something like this, and you start to, put some points in some places and start to model it this way. And although that might work for some people, we're going to use a little bit of a different um, method here. And what I'll do is I'm going to explain some of the things first. I'm going to show you how it's done, and I'll probably fast forward through some of the areas just to try and keep this video relatively short. So we're going to go ahead and Shift A, and we're going to add a grid. Now, when we add the grid, what's going to happen is down at the bottom left, you're going to see some subdivisions and all that. Just keep it 10 and 10 right now, and that's going to be just fine for what we're going to do. The next thing that we're going to do here is go ahead and select the empty or our reference that you see up here in your tree. Go down to the object data properties here, click on where it says transparency, and we're just going to pull this down a bit. Okay. Then click on your grid and then hit tab to go into edit mode. And here we can see that we have a grid. And if we go to wireframe mode, we can kind of see everything. And what we're going to do is from here, we're actually going to scale this up. So hit S and scale it up so that the top and bottom are roughly where they're supposed to be. Here and here. The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to enable an add-on that's called Auto Mirror. So if you go into your preferences, so edit preferences, and you do a search for mirror, you can see there is mesh auto mirror. So check that on. And what we're going to do is go over to edit, and you'll see right here it says auto mirror. And we're going to auto mirror this on the X and the Y. And what it does is it basically does a mirroring process where it cuts it across the X axis and then it will cut it across the Y axis. And then we'll be able to easily create this shape with this grid pattern here without having to do all these other ones, these different quadrants separately. So first we'll go X and then click on Auto Mirror, and you can see that it added that right there. Then I'm going to hit A to select all, click on Y, and then click right here where it says Auto Mirror. So now all we see is just this quadrant here, but you can see down here there is the mirrored sections on the left, right, and on the bottom here. So from here, basically what we can do is we can start grabbing this stuff. So if I select these with either the box select and then hit G and then X and pull this over, you can see that now I can start modeling this grid here to where I want it to go. And really what we're going to do is we're going to focus on the exterior, and we'll pull some of these other interior bits around a little bit, but we're going to do a smoothing later that allows us to make the internal bits a little bit more predictable. So uh, a couple things to help you out with this. Up here you have the box select, so left click and drag will let you select a lot of these and you can grab them, and you can see that they do become merged at the center of the mirror when you get it too close to that axis. And that goes for down here as well. If we grab these and we move them down, you can see that they become merged. So be careful about that. The other thing is if you select an object and you hold control and select to the end of, like, say this line here, you can select all of those and then scale that in whatever direction or pull it in a particular direction. Okay. The other thing that you can do is you can hit O, which will turn on right here, proportional editing. And if you click an area, you click and drag, you can see that there is like a brush size here when you roll on your middle mouse wheel up and down, and you can pull stuff around this way as well. And what we're trying to do is we're going to try and get this top area lined up with the top edge, and then this area down here lined up so that you have sort of like this curve here, and then a line that goes like this. Okay. So using those techniques that I talked about, we're going to quickly push these pieces back into the shape that we want, which is this pattern here. So I'm going to speed up this section. So at this point, I basically pulled everything into place. Again, don't worry about this stuff on the interior. We're going to worry about that in a little bit. And what we want to do here is we actually want to add a subdivision because we do want to have some of these curves here. But it's really good to start with this sort of like base first, this sort of baseline of the mesh, so that when we turn on our subdivision surface modifier, it's a little bit easier to kind of move things around. So let's go ahead and over here in the add modifier, click it and go down to subdivision surface. Make sure it's below your mirrors. And let's make this a 2 here for the levels in the viewport. And the next thing that we're going to want to do is we're going to click on this right here, this that's called on cage. It allows you to click and drag the sections and see it according to the actual subdivided mesh. Whereas if we didn't have that selected, you can see it kind of gets a little bit weird. You can see right here, there's the curve, but this is the actual cage that we're moving around. So this just makes it a little bit easier to move the pieces into place that you want it to be. So again, I'm going to speed through this section and I'm just going to show you how I'm doing it. For the top up here, you can select a bunch of these, hit S for scale, Z, and then Y, or sorry, not Z, not Z, S, Y, 0, and that will flatten them all out. So you can do that on this edge up here to get them all kind of straight. But basically, I'm going to do the same technique as before. I'm just going to refine this a little bit by pulling some of these points around and getting it a little bit more refined. Okay, so hopefully you got to this point. It doesn't have to be 100% perfect. We could add some loop cuts here, but we're really not going to do that. This won't really show up that much, and it depends on how much work you want to do. You could add some loop cuts, but we're not going to do that. So the next thing we're going to do here is we're going to smooth out all of these vertices in the center. Now, you could probably just leave these as it is, but when we start to do a couple of the subdividing and depth map stuff that we're going to do in a little bit, you might run into some problems. So let's just go ahead and box select all of this stuff in here. You could also use C for circle, and you can left click and drag to select those. And basically what we're going to do from this point, let's go ahead and save. So file, and then we're going to save this, and I'm going to call this tutorial actual, since I saved a practice before. Okay, so after we have that saved, let's go ahead and what we're going to do is we're going to grab all of our vertices right here in the middle. Okay, so box select, and you'll have to hold shift, or you can hit C for circle select, left click and drag, and select all of these vertices right in the middle here. Then what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to right click, and you'll want to go to smooth vertices. And then down here on the left, you're going to see where it says smooth vertices smoothing. And you can repeat this as many times as you want. You can leave this at 0.5 if you want, but we want to kind of put this all the way up to 1, and you can left click and drag this out. And what that's going to do is it's just going to smooth out our vertices so that from here to there and all of the edges, it gets a little bit more smoothed. Okay. And that makes it a little bit more predictable when some of the mesh changes that we're going to do a little bit later are done with the depth map. So that just kind of helps to keep everything nice and even. So let's go ahead and do some cleanup here. Let's take the empty and we're going to just call this logo reference or ref. And our grid here, we're going to call this logo, and we're going to call this pre-convert. And what we want to do here is we want to take both of these, we want to hit M to move it to a new collection, and we're going to call this pre-convert, just so that we have a backup. And what we're going to do here is we're going to grab the, we're actually going to turn off the reference because we don't need that anymore. And we're going to grab our mesh that we created here, hit Tab, hit A, and we're actually going to hit 3 to go to face select here. And we're going to extrude with E and make sure that you're locking it on the Z by hitting Z. And you'll see the blue line show up that's going down the Z axis. We're just going to pull this down to a particular depth. And we can change this later, but let's just pull that down so we can see what this looks like. When we go into solid mode, we can see overall our shape. And you can see that the subdivision here is making it to where it's no longer kind of like a blocky or sharp edge at the faces here on the top and bottom. It's more sort of smoothed. And what we're going to do is we're going to sharpen that by doing two things. Number one, we're going to, before we do this, we're going to start to apply these mirrors. And before we do that, we're going to hit Shift D to duplicate this and right click to place it right back in the same spot. We're going to change the name up here in your tree to logo convert. And we're actually going to click and drag this into the other collection. Or you can hit M and create a new collection if you want and name it whatever you would like. So when we have that selected, let's go ahead and turn off the pre-convert file or the pre-convert collection here. And we're going to go into the edit mode here, hit 2 for the edge select, and we're going to hold Alt, Shift, and left click all of these edges. Okay, so go around your object and make sure that you get all those edges selected. And what we want to do is we want to go up to Item, and we want to change the mean bevel weight right here because we're going to add a bevel. You're going to change this to a 1. Then in your modifiers here, we're going to do two things. We're going to apply the mirrors. So click this little drop down and click Apply for both mirrors. Okay. Then add a modifier, Bevel. And left click and drag from the bottom, move it up here above the subdivision. Now what this does is it's automatically going to bevel every single edge. So what we're going to do here is go to the limit method and change it to weight. And now it's only going to bevel the areas that we tell it to with our mean bevel weight information right here under edges data. So let's go into object mode here, right click shade smooth so we can kind of take a look at this, and you can sort of change how much of a bevel or how little of a bevel. You can add segments to round off that area if you want. I'm just going to leave it at 1 for now. We can change that up later. Actually, let's put it at 3 just to make this a little bit sharper. The next thing that we can do is we can actually change how this is being handled right here, where there's this sort of like a little bit of a bump out here. What we can do is we can take these same edges, so if you need to select them again, go ahead and do that. And you can change the mean crease right here by moving this up. So if you left click and drag, you can pull that up, and then that will make that a lot sharper. And you could do that with these as well. You can take the crease right here and pull this up, and you can see that it's added a crease right there, but I don't really like how that looks. You could add a mean bevel weight there too, but you can see it kind of messes up the mesh a little bit. So you got to be a little bit careful there. But I think this looks pretty good to just start with putting on our UV unwrap. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to unwrap this thing. And don't be afraid. I know that a lot of people are very not used to UV unwraps, but for doing logos and stuff, it really does help that you understand how this works. So up here, go ahead and go over to the UV editing, and it's going to start us in edit mode, as you can see here. And over on the left, I've already opened this image, but don't worry about that. We'll worry about that in a minute. Left click and drag here, and up here on the top left, you're going to change this to the shader editor. Okay. And we're just going to put in a temporary material here. So just hit new. And what you'll want to do is if you have Node Wrangler installed, you can hit Control T, and that will bring up these nodes here. And you could bring these in manually if you'd like with Shift A and then adding them and searching for them. But the easiest thing is to go to Preferences and go to the add-on section and just click on Node Wrangler for cycles. You really want to use that add-on. So then what we're going to do here is we're going to go to Open, and we're going to go to Assets, and we're going to open up this PNG that we have here. So let's open that up. And we aren't going to really see anything on here yet, but when we unwrap it, we are going to basically unwrap it to this object here. So make sure that here you have selected the Natron icon SVG or whatever your logo is. So then what we're going to do here is we're going to just hit A. We're going to go to 7, which is the top view. We're going to hit U to unwrap, and we're going to go right here, project from view. And that's going to project basically a set of UV coordinates into our UV editor here. And if we hit A, we can scale this up. Whoops. We can scale this up. Hold Shift to make it a little bit easier. And you can hit G to grab it and move it around to get it inside of your image. Something like that will do just fine. Doesn't have to be 100% perfect. Like I said, you could go in here, you could be super, super detailed, but we're not going to do that in this particular tutorial. You can feel free to do that on your own if you'd like. So what we're going to do here then is we're going to go over here to the right, go to Material Preview, and you can see that it's now been, the image is now mapped to our object. And if we go into Object Mode, you can see that there it is. So the edges aren't exactly, as clean as far as this gray area here. Like I said, you could go in and you could really refine that edge if you'd like and add more subdivisions and all that to the mesh, but again, this is to do it kind of quickly. So sometimes when you're working for a client, you want to try and do it really quick, at least just to get a first pass sent out to them before you do any refinements. But you'll see that this will actually work out just fine. Now, if you were really unwrapping this thing for real, and we're going to do some cheats and stuff like that with some of the materials, but really what you'd want to do is you'd want to unwrap this a little bit differently. You can see that here the way that it's been unwrapped, it's just a very, very thin sliver here because it was projected from a top view. What you could do is you could hit U and then make this a cube projection, and it will have something like this. And we can scale that down, pull it down to this gray area here. And then we can actually scale that up on the X if you want, and just make it kind of like that if you wanted to. You could do that. So thanks a lot for joining me in creating the logo for today. The next part is going to handle how to actually create the really cool depth look that you see here. And it's going to handle all the texturing and the lighting and rendering and all that. So if you like LuxCore and you want to continue on using the LuxCore engine, make sure that you follow in that tutorial. Otherwise, thanks a lot. This project file will be available for all of my patrons on Patreon, so make sure you become a patron. And make sure that you join the Discord server for any questions and for just joining the community. And I will see you next time on DJ Tutorials.